Breathe out here, and your breath does not drift away. It freezes in the air in front of your face, and it falls. The old people in this village have a name for that sound. They call it the whispering of the stars. You only hear it below 50 degrees Celsius, and on the morning this story begins, it was far colder than that. The number carved into the monument down the road says -71. The official record says -67.7. Out here, somewhere past -50. The difference stops mattering, because that is the temperature where steel stops behaving like steel and shatters like glass. And into that air, before the sun has even cleared the horizon, an entire village walks out onto a frozen lake carrying nets. They are not going fishing. They are going to take their lives back from the winter, 5,000 kilograms at a time. At the front of the line walks an old man, and after 100 meters he stops. He kneels. He lays his ear flat against the ice, and behind him, 100 people stop moving and go silent, because whatever he hears in the next few seconds will decide what happens to all of them. Understand what is at stake. If today fails, nobody goes home hungry tonight. They go home fine. It is March that kills them. And of the 5,000 kilograms they are about to pull from that lake, there is one portion that no one in that crowd is permitted to eat. Not the strongest man, not the man who owns the net, no one. This is not fishing. This is a 300-year-old negotiation with death, and every person standing on that ice knows the terms. To understand those terms, you have to understand where they are standing. This is Yakutia, in the Russian Far East, a land larger than Argentina and emptier than almost anywhere on Earth that human beings have agreed to live. It is home to Oymyakon, the coldest permanently inhabited place on the planet, and the cold here is not weather. It is a force with physical rules of its own. Car tires crack, batteries die in minutes. Throw a cup of boiling water into the air and it never lands, because it turns to snow before it can fall. And what the cold does to metal, it has already done, permanently, to the ground beneath their feet. The soil here is permafrost, frozen solid hundreds of meters down, and it does not thaw. You cannot plow it, you cannot plant in it. For half of every year, these people live inside a civilization, with no agriculture whatsoever. And that is where the arithmetic turns cruel. A grown man working outdoors in this cold burns 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. Not to grow strong, not to get ahead, but simply to not die. Multiply that by every mouth in the village. Multiply that by the length of a Siberian winter. The number you get is not a number about appetite. It is the reason 5,000 kilograms of fish is not a triumph. It is a minimum. It is not a feast. It is the margin between the village and March. And here is the strange thing. On the other side of the world, the Norse who settled Greenland faced their own version of this map, and so did the Athabascan peoples of interior Alaska. And none of these three cultures ever met, never traded a word or an idea, and yet every one of them arrived at exactly the same conclusion. The cold cannot be beaten by one person. Extreme survival was never a story about the strongest man. It was always a story about the group that knew how not to leave anyone behind. Which raises a question worth holding on to, because the Norse in Greenland were clever and disciplined and hard-working, and they are gone. Every one of their settlements went silent. The people standing on this ice are still here. That difference is not an accident, and by the end of this story, you will know exactly what it cost them to earn it. What they are about to do has a name. They call it the munker, and it is one of the oldest forms of collective fishing still practiced anywhere on Earth. A communal hunt carried out not by a boat or a man, but by an entire settlement working as a single organism. And it begins with the old man on his knees. He is not praying. He is listening, because ice sings. Ice under pressure hums. Ice that is thickening cracks. Ice that is thinning breathes. And a man who has knelt on this lake every winter for 60 years can hear the difference the way you hear a wrong note in a song you have known your whole life. He has to be right, because 100 people and several tons of gear are about to walk out over black water. If the ice opens, you have 2, maybe 3 minutes before your muscles stop obeying you. Nobody swims out of that. Nobody gets pulled out in time. So the most important tool on the lake today is not the net. It is a 70-year-old pair of ears. When he nods, the work begins, and the work is a puzzle that sounds impossible the moment you say it out loud. They need to spread a net hundreds of meters long underneath a solid sheet of ice. They cannot see through it. they cannot dive under it. So first, they cut holes, dozens of them, in 2 long curving arcs that reach out across the lake like a pair of arms. And the placement of every single hole matters, because those holes are the only doors they will ever have. Then comes the ancient solution. They take a long wooden pole, slide it into the water, and let it float upward until it presses flat against the underside of the ice. And from the next hole down the line, a man reaches in with a hooked stick, finds the tip of that pole in the dark, and drags it forward, hole to hole, meter by meter. It is threading a needle through fabric while blindfolded, and they do it dozens of times, for hours, in air that can freeze exposed skin in under a minute. And that is where you learn the cruelest lesson this lake teaches, because wet gloves in this cold do not just make you uncomfortable, they take your fingers. So the men do something that sounds like madness. They plunge their bare hands into the water, then pull them out into the air, and let the water freeze into a thin shell of ice around their skin. Out here, ice is the insulation. You have to get wet in order to stay dry. Meanwhile, the 2 arms of the net close, slowly, into a funnel, and every fish in that stretch of lake is being herded toward one final hole, and there is no sound of shouting, no orders being barked, just the rhythm of poles tapping against ice, an 8-year-old holding a rope, an 80-year-old reading the ice, and not one single person out there who is useless. The net does not catch the fish, the village does. Then the final hole breaks open, and the lake gives up everything at once. Fish come pouring out onto the surface, hundreds of them, thousands, a silver flood spilling across white ice. And here is the thing almost nobody expects. They do not thrash for long. In this air, a living fish stops moving in under a minute. It does not die slowly, it turns to stone. What you are watching does not look like a catch. It looks like a harvest being reaped in metal. And in that single moment, something reverses that changes the entire meaning of this story, because for the last 10 minutes I have been telling you that the cold is the enemy. The cold cracks steel. The cold takes fingers. The cold kills a man in 3 minutes under the ice. But the instant that fish touches the surface, the cold switches sides. No salt, no smoke, no fire, no electricity. No refrigeration of any kind, because this place is the largest freezer on Earth, and it is free. These people did not survive in spite of the cold. They survived by turning the thing that was trying to kill them into the warehouse that keeps them alive. And they built for that. Dug straight down into the permafrost are the boolious ice cellars, chambers cut into ground that never thaws, holding below freezing all year long. In July, as reliably as in January, a cold storage system that has been running for centuries without consuming a single watt of power. And out on the ice, before anyone goes home, they eat. They take a frozen fish, and they shave it into curls as thin as paper, and they eat it raw, standing up, in the wind. They call it stroganina, and it is not a delicacy, it is not a tradition performed for guests. It is instant calories poured into a body that is losing heat faster than it can make it, and it is the only way to eat food that will freeze solid again in your hands if you wait too long. And then comes the moment I promised you at the beginning. The fish is divided, and it is not divided by who worked hardest. The man who hauled the heaviest line and the child who only held a rope receive the same share. And before either of them takes anything, the first portion is set aside, and it is carried to the houses that sent no one to the lake that day. The old, the widowed, the sick, the ones who physically could not come, and no one touches it. Not the strongest man. Not the man who owns the net. And it would be easy to call that kindness, but out here, it is something colder and far more permanent than kindness, because at 60 below, greed is simply a bad survival strategy. Next winter, the strongest man on the ice today could be the one lying in bed. Sharing is not charity. Sharing is insurance. And there is one more thing they do before the nets go in. A thing that sounds like superstition until you look at what it actually enforces. They feed the fire. They throw food into the flames and ask the lake for permission. And that ritual is not decoration. It is a contract they sign with themselves. A promise to take enough and never take everything, because the lake has to still have fish in it next winter, and the winter after that, and the one their grandchildren will have to survive. Which brings us back to the question I left with you, the one about Greenland. The Norse arrived there with iron. with ships, with writing, with everything the world has ever agreed to call an advantage. And they built farms. They raised cattle and sheep on an island that could not feed cattle and sheep. And when the winters lengthened and the grass failed, they did not change. For centuries they lived beside the Inuit, who were feeding themselves out of that same landscape without difficulty, hunting seal, reading ice, storing meat in the frozen ground, and the Norse learned almost nothing from them. Roughly 500 years after they came, the Norse settlements went quiet. The houses stayed. The people did not. The Inuit are still there. So the lesson the cold teaches is not the one we like to tell ourselves. The cold does not kill the weak. It kills whoever refuses to change. Survival was never about carrying your old world with you into a new one. It was about letting the new place rewrite you. And that is what you are actually watching, when the old man finally stands up off the ice, brushes the frost from his coat, and turns to face 100 people who have not moved a muscle since he knelt down. He nods. And that nod is not one man's knowledge. It is 300 winters of listening, handed down ear to ear, from a man who is now 70 years old to whoever is standing close enough to learn it. Which means the most fragile thing on that lake was never the ice. When he dies, if no one has knelt down beside him, if no one has learned to hear the difference between ice that is thickening and ice that is thinning, then what dies with him is not an old man. It is the village. Just slowly. We call these people primitive. We say it about the tools, the nets, the wooden poles, the hands frozen into gloves of ice. But they have something the modern world is quietly losing, because every single person on that lake knows exactly who needs them and exactly who they need. At 70 below, nobody is confident enough to be alone. The cold never asked who was strongest. It only ever asked one question, and it asked it of every civilization that ever tried to live inside it. Who did you bring with you? Next time, we go to Alaska, into the forests of the interior, where the Athabascan people held off 40 below inside a house with no chimney at all, and where the smoke that should have killed them was the very thing that kept them alive. Subscribe and come with us.